Professor Pat Murphy, and I'd like to welcome you to the fourth Berges Lecture Series for the fall of 2012. We're pleased to have Mr. Anthony Welters, Executive Vice President and member of the Office of CEO for United Health Group, which serves over 70 million Americans through its health and well-being companies, and who's progressed in the organization in the last decade. But the United Healthcare community and state is one of the country's leading providers of services to beneficiaries of government-sponsored healthcare programs, and this was founded by Mr. Welters in 1989 before it was eventually taken over by United Health Group. Mr. Welters' business and healthcare expertise, as well as his commitment to educational, cultural, and community service are widely sought. He's on several boards of directors today. He just came from a board meeting. He's chairman of the board of Morehouse School of Medicine, as well as the New York University School of Law, vice chairman of the board of the New York University, and a trustee of the NYU Medical Center. He's a member of the prestigious American Academy of Arts and Sciences. He was born and raised in New York City, earned a BA from Manhattanville College, JD from NYU, and throughout his career he's had a strong commitment to youth and countless children and young adults, trying to give them a path for a brighter future. With his wife Beatrice, who is now just finishing a stint as ambassador to the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. They started the Ann Bryce Foundation to enhance the social and educational development of disadvantaged children, and they're providing full tuition scholarships and a mentoring program for more than 30 students at NYU Law School through this Scholars Program. Tony is also a Notre Dame parent. He has one son who's an alum, another son who's a senior. So please, and his title tonight is Core Values versus Ethical Rules. Please join me in giving a warm Notre Dame welcome to Anthony Welters.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening.
I'll share with you an observation, and it goes along these lines. Whenever we as a company bring our executives together, and we're a very large company, 94,000 people, and we have an auditorium, and we always observe the people head to the back versus the people head to the front. And there's something about what you discover why people move away from senior management. And so I spend a lot of time trying to convince people that we don't fight, and we're normal human beings. So for those of you in the back, I can assure you, whatever I have to say, you will not find offensive, and it's always better to be close than far away from individuals. That's true in life as well as in business. When I was asked to provide this lecture, I assembled a group of my own staff to think about it a little bit, because it was supposed to be a lecture on ethics, business ethics. And I decided that I much prefer to talk about core values, because, and I made this comment earlier, I'm not smart enough to figure out how you live one life during your day job and another life when you're away from work. So I believe that business ethics is really a subset of who and what you are as an individual. And that corporate cultures, if you capture in the culture core values, then more often than not, the regulatory compliance apparatus will be a small subset of your enterprise. I come from an industry that's probably one of the most regulated industries in America, and soon to be one of the most regulated industries in the world, I believe. But what I recognize is this. Regulations are always chasing behavior. There's never a regulation that an individual is incapable, a smart individual is incapable of working around. So inside our enterprise, we don't emphasize compliance. We don't emphasize what can happen if you violate a regulation. What we emphasize is what happens when your conduct is inconsistent with the conduct of our enterprise. Because day to day, we don't know whether or not the federal government, the state government, or some international organization will promulgate a new rule. Okay. So we can't afford to run the risk of having to re-educate 94,000 people every time a new regulation comes out. And what we also have learned over the years that regulations cannot create ethical behavior. Regulations cannot create ethical behavior, nor can they monitor ethical behavior. Because we believe inside our enterprise, it really comes down to individual values. And more importantly, in a kind of corporate setting, what an enterprise says to its employees about conduct, but more importantly than what an enterprise says to an individual is what that enterprise shows to the individual about the values of a company. And that's important in today's world. I want you to imagine in our situation where we provide health care coverage to more senior Americans than any other company in America. Our conduct can impact on the lives of millions and millions of Americans. It's not the conduct of the company, it's the conduct of the individual that has set the record. For those of you who have access to the healthcare system, you know others who have. Decisions that are made can be life and death decisions. And so what you want is to have each individual understanding there's a value proposition that an enterprise has, and they will not violate that value proposition. And in many ways, inside our company, it's been a little easier because I think our values were developed long before we saw a new group of regulations. So imagine this as the challenge. You set the bar up here, and then someone comes along with a group of regulations, and that bar is set down here. So now you have to say to your people, I don't care about those regulations down there because that bar is too low. This is our expectation. So, and the reason that's important is that in many instances, you'll have a conversation that goes along these lines. I didn't violate any rules. As an answer for doing something inconsistent with the core values of the company. And in many organizations, they sometimes forget that that is a starting point for a value system of an enterprise. The regulatory apparatus is a starting point for expectations. not an endpoint. And to get that message out to an organization is not easy. So for us, if you can imagine there's an organization with 94,000 people, you're really trying to convince each employee to be an ambassador for the value of the enterprise. So that means that as a senior executive, it's not what you say that really matters. It's clearly what you do that becomes overarching. Some refer to it as the shadow of leadership. And in theory, it works very well. In practice, it's very challenging. I made the comment to some individuals, it's easy to say you have a value system in place until someone comes to you and tells you one of your top performers, someone that you know is as reliable as the day is long to hit their performance numbers, someone that you know for years you could rely upon. And then someone comes into your office and says, you know what, they're engaged in some inappropriate conduct. That's when the theory and the practice are tested. And I can tell you, as an individual have to confront that, it is not an easy decision. I like to think myself and my colleagues have built a great enterprise. And we built it collectively with a lot of talented people. So anytime you're confronted with one of those team members who you have been in a foxhole with, to rely on every day of the week, now it's time to either test your core values against the loyalties associated with the individual. Generally, I won't say generally, in many instances, that's when people try to negotiate the compliance program with the core values. And you hear this discussion about, well, it's not inconsistent with our compliance program, and they pull out the rule books. And they want to give you chapter and verse. But for the prior 10 years, you said that our system had expectations far greater than the rule book. Okay? And when you have to make those decisions, it causes a pause for reflection. But what you realize is this: as a senior executive, that issue that's come to your attention, guess what? Probably 10,000 employees at lower levels have been wondering about that same issue long before it ever showed up at your desk. Okay? And so they're all sitting on the sidelines waiting to see what you plan to do about it. And it's been my experience when you make these hard decisions, when there's not compliance with your core values, those employees, they do one of two things. They say to themselves, I'm glad to be a part of this company. Or they say, I wasn't sure how the company would land on that issue. But what it means, though, is that you've now made it over a critical hurdle. And what that means is that now your value system is clearly integrated into how you conduct your business. And as an employee, and many of you have been in the market, you'll go into the market, I encourage you to take pride in the fact that you have a value system. I encourage you to take pride in the fact that you have a value system. And I'll also say to you, as you think about your own career, if you're with enterprises that do not engage with you about your values, let that be a red flag. Let that be a red flag. Because it's not only good ethically, it also means that you can find yourself in an enterprise where you can be exposed to great risk. Because enterprises that are not taking great pride in their internal values, not their value proposition in the marketplace, but their value proposition inside their own enterprise. If they don't take enough pride in that, that should be a warning signal to you. When you think about ethics and compliance programs, for instance, they're designed to do three things, at least in my view. One, prevention. What you want to do is not have to engage in a discussion around inappropriate activity. So you want to set a standard on the front end that everyone understands. Two, and this is that notion of detection and controls. We believe in trust, but we also believe in verification. Always have a system that allows you to test your value propositions against your activities. The most important part, in my view, centers around what I would call the correction process. Every enterprise will misstep at times. Our company is no different. I'm no different than anyone else. The question and the challenge is, what do you do after the misstep? In other words, what do you do with lessons learned? Inside government contracting, they have this concept of self-reporting. So, and what that means is that an enterprise, if it's doing business with the government and it discovers some inappropriate conduct, there's an expectation that you'll raise your hand, take a time out, and acknowledge that. It sounds simple, right? I can tell you, when you engage with enterprises about self-reporting, I've listened to conversations go along these lines. Well, if you self-report, when you go into the penalty box, if you self-report, will it impact on future contracts? Or can you just ride it out and maybe no one will find out? And so as an enterprise, you have to create an environment where you don't have that conversation. You don't have it. Because well-intentioned people get together and they start rationalizing bad conduct. That's the beginning of a recipe for disaster. So we inside our enterprise have adopted a very simple philosophy. If we screw up, let's just get it on the table as quickly as possible. Let's acknowledge it. Let's get a corrective action plan, and let's move forward. I hope that's the norm, but I wouldn't that your tuition on that being known is something that I believe that we as executives must aspire to achieve. Because in many ways, the discourse that occurs inside our society in many ways, our private sector ends up being under the microscope. So how we carry ourselves will have a material impact on the expectations of the society, of us. And I say to my colleagues at times, maybe we did bargain for having that level of accountability and responsibility, but we haven't. And every time an enterprise missteps, it has a material effect on every other enterprise. Truth is that the healthcare industry in America became more highly regulated after bad conduct was identified inside the financial services industry. Think about it. We're in a completely different industry. But if you look at what occurred, our industry became more regulated, aggressively regulated in just the past 2 years. And the rationale for it with some was that you don't want a duplication of bad behavior that we've seen in other industries. So imagine for a moment, someone wakes up in the morning, says to you, I don't have any issues with you, but just to make sure I don't have any issues with you, I'm going to promulgate a rule book for you. And so, in many ways, what we inside United have recognized long before that is that the potential always exists for you to be under real scrutiny, so you better be prepared just in case it happens. And so we end up articulating our values. That's the other thing I'll say. You can have a value system, but if you can't articulate them such that every employee owns them, every employee owns the values. That's so critical. So we articulate our values around 4 critical components: integrity, compassion, relationships, and performance. And you may say, how do these values relate to a company that's the 22nd largest company in America? How does compassion and relationships relate to that? And what we've learned in our time, that integrity is the most important ingredient to a successful enterprise, because it's about living up to commitments. You can't have a long-term relationship with a customer or an individual if they do not believe you live up to your commitments. And that goes beyond a contract. It goes beyond the regulation. It is that in some ways, I plan to do what I believe is appropriate, irrespective of the contractual language, irrespective of the regulatory requirement. It almost centers everyone around doing those things that they believe are important to who and what they are as individuals. It goes beyond financial returns, and it goes beyond stock price. When we think about compassion, we are in an industry where we're interfacing with millions and millions of people, millions and millions of Americans. That compassion for us translates into what we call the customer experience. And in large organizations, you have to have a shortcut of expressing that. So when we say to people, when you have to make that judgment call, treat people the way you want to be treated. If you do that, you're probably on the right glide path. And so 94,000 people, you have to have an easy way of doing it. So the question is, in this, if you're in senior meetings, you'll hear this kind of conversation. Did you treat that person the way you wanted to be treated? Or if that was your mother on the other end of the phone, would she have received the same response from you? If the answer is yes, then let's move on. If the answer is no, then you need to take a deep breath. In doing it that way, we achieve a couple of other things. One, a higher level of transparency. Two, a level of fairness. And three, and this is so important inside organizations, it is outwardly focused versus inwardly focused. In other words, you want to have a value system that third parties embrace, not just your own colleagues and employees. We selected relationships because in relationships comes a high level of accountability. And people, we've discovered, not discovered, we recognize, the better way of putting it, that people perform better when they're performing because of a relationship than they do just because you're supposed to. So what we're trying to do in creating our core value is to give each employee vested in the fact that they have a relationship with customers. Some that they know, others that they don't. But that relationship requires them to do more than just their job. Because if everyone only, we believe if everyone does the minimum, which is meeting your job description, that enterprise has vulnerability when it comes to ethical conduct and issues. So we want people, we believe we figured out some ways for people to be even more accountable, not less accountable. And as we think about relationships, sometimes organizations do a fine job of managing those external relationships. Okay? It's kind of the things that you do when everybody's looking at you. What we're trying to get to in our enterprise are also the internal relationships. We really want people to feel empowered to do what they think is the right thing to do when no one's looking. Because that's when the enterprise is at its greatest risk. for bad behavior. It's the bad behavior that occurs when no one's looking. And so we believe and we've become strong advocates around people having obligations and relationships to each other internally as well as externally. And that also leads to a great success, is that people start to own things personally. So you go from a conversation that would center around whose responsibility that issue set. So what you want people to say is that irrespective of whether or not it was in my job description, I saw the problem, I engaged with the problem, and I helped to solve the problem. It is that personal ownership that we work hard. It's kind of like deputizing everyone to protect the values inside the enterprise, not the values inside your operating unit or your group. The challenge with that also centers around this. And this is another one that is a challenge, one that's so important. When our associates and colleagues, at whatever level, identify an issue, we have to take it seriously. And we have to convince them, every time they raise their hand with an issue, that this management team will look into it. Not superficially, but to the greatest extent possible to their satisfaction. So imagine that. Imagine a company where the employee realizes if they raise their hand and raise an issue, they know that their voice will be not only heard, but they also know that they will get a report on the outcome. A lot of companies approach it because they'll have an ethics hotline, and we have that. But more importantly is that every employee has access to the email address that everyone else inside the company. So, and our CEO expects each and every one of us to respond to all of our emails in a timely fashion. That's the only part of our program of creating appropriate values that I object to. And people understand I go along with everything else, but this timely response to email, but I have to live with that. But living with that, as painful as it is for me, I watch employees when I run into them, okay, talk about that. And they talk about that in the hallway, at the water, that they can say to, they don't have to say it anymore. At one time, they would say, you know, I don't agree with you, manager, and I feel strong enough, I'm going to raise this as an issue. Okay? Throughout the organization, people know that they're empowered to do that. It's a strong, strong tool for accountability. Because inside our organization, they hit that CC box like it's going out of style. Okay? You know, and because of the culture we've created, there's no one is protected. So they'll whip it out to board members. Okay, they'll whip it out to anybody. And trust me, you do not want to have to explain to your board about an issue. But it's also great discipline for the organization, because that empowerment creates a level of accountability that no rule or regulation could ever do. Bad behavior is costly. That's the one thing that enterprises discover late in life. You know, from an enterprise perspective, you can take billions of dollars out of your market cap. Just the implication of bad behavior can be devastating to an enterprise. So all of these things around value and accountability, it's all about having the strongest possible enterprise. Now, we take it, some will contend, to an extreme. I don't think so. But our core values, those values that I talked about, issues around integrity, compassion, relationships, performance, are embedded in our compensation packages. Okay? So this is not a one-off. And our CEO, to make sure that everyone's hands are on top of the table, we do something different to validate it. We do what we call every year a vital signs survey. So we ask our employees through a contracted third-party survey that each individual responds to, okay, how we're doing, and that becomes our scorecard. And as a matter of fact, to make matters even more challenging, if inside your group the number of respondents drops from one year to the next, you're also penalizing the compensation package. So in other words, you have to, one, work hard to convince your employees to fill out the survey, and then you have to hope like hell when they fill it out, you've been doing your job. Because one way or the other, if they don't work together, you have a problem. I'll stop with that because the one takeaway is this. No organization is any stronger, you've heard this before, than its weakest link. An organization that has strong values will always, in my view, be the superior performer, because the employees themselves are then vested in the outcome. And you will get 200% out of vested employees versus those who are just working to earn a paycheck. And inside our company, with our mission and our values, we do not want employees who are just trying to earn a living, because our mission is too critical. I'll conclude with that, and if it's okay, Professor, I'll open the floor for some questions.
Maybe let's follow up on your point about somebody complains to you and told us over dinner. How do you handle that?
So that when I receive an email from an employee, obviously a large organization, so I will assign it to someone. And we do not normally, I'll assign it via email. But the way it works is this. I'll send an email, I'll respond to the email, identifying the individual who will follow up. I will then say in that email, and after that individual follows up with you, I want to hear from you about whether or not you're satisfied with the resolution. that does is it creates a different level of accountability. Because now the individual I assigned the task to is on notice that it's not sufficient just for that individual to tell me they handled it. It's the person that originated the email that must say to me, I'm satisfied. And once again, it's just working hard to put as much accountability in the system as possible, because you get better outcomes then.
All right, who'll be first? Questions?
I was that good?
Oh, they're just a little reluctant. Yeah.
You mentioned
Maybe stand up and.
you mentioned that bad behavior can be costly, and I know it can be costly in relationships and with employees and bosses together, but is it costly financially to your company in dollars? And if
You
so,
know,
how?
About 6-7 years ago, an issue was identified about backdating a stock option. And it's public, so it's no secret. And our company, one of the companies investigated and went through a very painful period. The settlements in alone ran into the hundreds of millions of dollars. I can't even estimate the diversion of time and energy away from the primary mission of our enterprise during that period. Okay. So the economic cost was real. And if you don't think so, I encourage you to go on Bloomberg and look at our stock price during that period of early '06 and watch what happened with the news article. It reinforces the fact that you better do everything you can to protect your enterprise and put infrastructure in place to protect the enterprise.
Very good. Next question? Yep. Stand up, please.
I just wanted to make sure I understood exactly what you're trying to say. To your point that it is more important to just have a set of rules. You want to actually have your employees understand why it is important to be ethical, so that they not only are going to behave ethical because they're adhering to the rules, but they'll behave ethically because they want to, because they know it's the right thing. Is that what you're?
Yeah, I'm drawing a real distinction between ethical rules and the value-based corporate structure. And what I'm saying is that the ethical rules should be a lower standard than the value system of the enterprise. And we're shooting for the value system of the enterprise.
You mentioned that the healthcare industry was one of the most regulated in the country. How do you, especially in the future, how do you ensure that all of your employees are aware of what the regulations and expectations are?
We spend a lot of time, we as senior managers spend a lot of time town hall meetings with our employees discussing these issues, websites. There's an entire group that's focused on engagement with our employees. And each of us as senior managers are tasked to be a part of that actual hands-on engagement, and that's how we do it. And it's real time. Any other questions?
Someone told me, Tony, that when you were interviewing people that you watch how they deal with other people who many told me that. I think it would be helpful for you to share that with the students.
It's true. So I have put in context. I came from a family, neither of my parents ever graduated from high school. My mother was a domestic worker and my father was a shipping clerk. So what I learned from my parents was this. If you want to find out what someone is really like, okay, give them an opportunity to expose themselves. So when I'm recruiting senior executives, I always take them to dinner. Okay? And they think I'm taking them to dinner to interest them. I'm really taking them to dinner to figure out how they treat the staff in the restaurant. Okay? Because my theory is this, but for my title, that's how they would treat me. And you learn a lot about people when no one's looking. And it's amazing to me how many people view support staff as not looking. They're like invisible. It's like the driver, you know. I have a driver, so when I'm dealing with people, I tell them to take the car. And then I talk to the driver. Okay? The driver has more influence on my decision making than anything I see in an interview, anything I see or read on the resume. Because between what people do in restaurants and talking to staff, and, you know, I have some restaurants I go to, and it's really unfair because, you know, they order the steak and they say that they want it medium, and people know I'll wink at them, and then, you know, they'll make it well done, you know, and just kind of, you know they want the salad, and you just tell them, look, it can be a little drippy just to see, you know. And so, but, and some people would contend that that's not fair. But when I'm trying to figure out whether or not I should empower you to help run a multi-billion-dollar industry, okay, you better inform on people. And you better know as quickly as possible what you're getting. Because the other unfortunate truth is this. It's easy to hire an executive. It's hard as hell to get rid of them. And generally, it's very costly. So.
One last question, maybe? Well, please join me in thanking Tony. One announcement before we go.